Okay, hello. Oh my God, my eyes are red. Anyway, not for any illicit reasons, just fatigue. Good evening, good morning, hello. Welcome aboard, friends and French fries. Lovely to have you with me. I'm Tad. I will be reading and hanging out and doing stuff. So lovely to see you. It's been a while. As you know, I took last weekend off because Deb had an early birthday present of going up to the city. To the city is what we say in the Bay Area when we mean San Francisco, even though there's actually a city in the Bay Area that has a larger population than San Francisco. But San Francisco has been the city since the late 19th century, or probably even earlier than that. Certainly since the 19th century. And Oakland is a very important city too, but when we say the city, we usually mean San Francisco around these parts. Anyway, so yeah, we went up and saw Lizzo. It was a wonderful night. It was, as I said, my only complaint was that I was next to somebody who clearly knew the words to every single song, which I don't. Much as I like Lizzo, I'm not. I don't know every song by heart, and so of course, this person next to me, most of the people in the audience, it seemed like, were singing along the whole time, and this woman who was having that time of her life, bless her, was literally singing every single song along with Lizzo very loudly, right in my ear. So that's really what I heard for most of the show. But it was great fun. If you, those of you who haven't seen it, these Lizzo's shows are just a big love fest, and not for any one group or anything. They're, her big thing is love yourself, and there's just this real positive vibe to everything she does. She's also, of course, extremely talented, both as a singer and a songwriter and rapper and, the whole bit. She's incredibly talented. I first ran across her on a really interesting animated comedy show, a Brad Neely comedy show with the very strange title. And I'm only telling you this in case you see it. It's worth checking out. It was called Brad Neely's Hargnallen Sclopio PPO. That's the name. Brad Neely's Hargnallen Sclopio PPO. Anyway, wonderful, a very odd animated TV comedy show. Brad Neely is a very entertaining and strange guy. And he has guest stars in this animated show doing voices and bits, and I don't know how much they're involved in the writing, but Lizzo's stuff was very Lizzo, and that's where I first ran across her. And she did some singing during that show, so I knew she could do that, but I didn't realize that was kind of her primary focus. But anyway, so I turned my kids on to her, and Deb ran across her on her own, I think, and became a big fan. And so I was very glad we got to go. And I'm sorry I was not here. So what's the other news that's happened in the last week? Continue craziness on the front with everything we're trying to do about the house and stuff. So I won't even go into that. But oh yeah, and we had Johnny got taken to the vet last week for he's been having a cyst over one eye that has been dealt with several times and keeps coming back and coming back. So we finally went, okay, well, we'll have it operated on. So poor big dog Johnny is coned. He is wearing a cone. He is cone dog. He is not thrilled, as you can imagine. And who would be? I wouldn't be. If I had to go around with a cone over my head for 2+ weeks. I would not be a happy camper, and Johnny is not a happy camper either, but he's more used to it now after a few days of wearing it. It breaks my heart, of course. I mean, there's like that, it's the impulse to take it off him is so powerful. Just, oh, you poor dog. But, we have to keep him from messing with his stitches until they get taken out on like the 30th. So that's poor John. And of course, I don't think dogs entirely grasp the concept of cone. So instead of, like the first day being, getting used to it and then just like, walking around with his proprioceptive senses working properly, he still just clunks into things all the time, including us. He still acts like he's not wearing a cone. And the thing is, it's big because it's meant to keep him from bumping his eye against anything or being able to scratch it with his own paws. So he is a walking hazard. He is, like one of those juggernauts out of the old Indian religious parades, that just roll through the street crushing bystanders. He just clunk, smash, thump, bang, knocking things off. So that's like all that's happened here. Oh, and last thing to mention, which is that I am really now honed in on the end of the first draft of Navigator's Children, and by that I mean I literally know what's left, and it's like a total of about one chapter. It's like half of a chapter and then a short chapter. So I pretty much know everything that I'm going to write. I just have to write it now. So I should be done sometime right around Thanksgiving, which is Thursday, or soon thereafter. So that's my news. That's what's going on here at Lake Wobegon West. And I don't think I have anything else really to report. I could talk at length about the book and that stuff, but I have to go back through it now and polish it up and put in the bits that I kind of skipped over and said, I'll come back to this. I'm not happy with it, and that kind of stuff. But I don't really have, I'm only, as one does, I'm reading it in bits and pieces as I go forward, just to kind of keep myself in rhythm and thematically similar from bit to bit. But I don't go back very far. So I'm kind of continuously reading the prior chapter or so. So I'm going to have to sit down, because this is going to be a long book. I'm going to have to sit down with the whole thing and see how it all fits together before I can tell you whether it's worth reading or not. I hope it will be. I think it will be. I think certainly I'm doing a good job of answering all of the questions that I have nudged people into asking during the course of the first three books, and some questions that people were probably asking from back in the days of the Dragonbone chair, etc. Because as I've said a few times, one of the interesting things about this story, and particularly this last volume, is that it's dealing with the entire, history of Ostenard as so far revealed in all of the other books. So the first set of books, and Burning Man, and the Heart of What Was Lost. Sorry, it was originally going to be called Heart of Regret, and my publishers thought regret was a terrible word to put in a title. I don't know why. I like it. But the Heart of What Was Lost, and Brothers of the Wind, and then the whole subsequent Witchwood Crown Empire, etc. So it's been a massive undertaking, I have to say, but entertaining in a sense too. I mean, I don't think I've ever tried to stack as many ideas in one book, and that includes the Otherland books. Now, the Otherland books as a whole, yeah, they're like full of weird ideas, but in terms of answering all these things and making sense out of all of them, and paying off all of the mysteries, and hopefully paying off all the mysteries in a satisfying way. It's been an interesting experiment, and the fact that it's been happening in the midst of an otherwise extremely overwhelming year has added to the interest value, for lack of a better term. It has made it even more interesting to be dealing with this stuff through all of the uncertainty about where we're going to be living, and losing my mom, and just all kinds of crazy stuff, and kind of cycling back and forth, commuting over the hill to stay with my dad, and which both Deborah and I have been doing. So it's been a crazy year. I hope that it will only reflect well in the eventual book. That people won't say, God, what happened to him? But I have some some precedent for hoping it will turn out well. And the precedent is that when I was writing to Green Angel Tower, which I think worked pretty well, I was going through another horrendous time in my life. In that case, the end of my first marriage and moving out, and then eventually moving to England, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. And in fact, I've told this story before. I think that when I was writing, and this is not, I don't think, a real spoiler, when I was writing the Simon on the Wheel section of To Green Angel Tower, which had been something that I had planned for a long, long time. Obviously, it's foreshadowed in his dreams and things like that. But when I was writing that section, I was actually kind of on the wheel myself, and it was like oddly coincidental. And there are some things that have happened in the writing of this last book that have been oddly coincidental as well. So I'm hoping that the precedent carries over, and that despite all of the craziness and genuine sadness that has happened in the world and in my life, that the book will hold up in the way that Green Angel Tower did, or has, I guess. At least how I hope that it has. I think it has. It must be. I mean, there's at least people have enjoyed it enough that it's still in print and people are still reading it today. So anyway, so having babbled all that babble, and having caught you up on a few of the things that have been happening in the last little while since we checked in with each other, I'm going to say hello to the people who have checked in here. And interestingly, nobody is mentioning that there's a problem with the sound. So I will assume that means that the sound is working tonight. I have gone back to my old microphone, and I have added some other components in to hopefully make things work a little better. So, but continue to let me know if there's problems, because I really don't like it when there are, and I want to solve them. Anyway, so Holger, first and foremost. Holger is saying, good morning to all snowmen and snowwomen from the Berlin area. Yeah, we've had massive snows in the east of the United States, especially northeast of the United States. Upstate New York and places like that, they've gotten like 70 inches of snow in the last 48 hours or so. It's been horrendous. But anyway, so glad you are here, and I just told you how the last weekend was, which was very good. And Deb and I had a lovely time at the Lizzo show once we actually figured out how to get in, because it's a slightly confusing complex. Wait a minute, why are my things disappearing here? Don't do that. Somebody's name's just, never mind. Let me just quickly say it's pushing people back off the thing. Anamika, hello, good morning. Good to see you. Becky, hello, hello. Good to be back. Mark, good morning to you. That's Mark Redman. Wouter, good evening, good day. Hello from a cold Enschede. Do you know Enschede is actually a sister city to my hometown, Palo Alto. And I know this because my parents, is led by my mom, who was big into things like this, was the Neighbors Abroad chairman for quite some time. My parents were both. And so Enschede, along with Linköping in Sweden and several other cities, are all sister cities of Palo Alto. Anyway, so hello to Enschede. Debbie, good morning. Good to see you. Mahmoud, good to see you too. A pleasure. Holger, I already said hello, I think, but good to see you again. Delicious mulled wine jelly for breakfast, homemade. Very nice. Isaac, greetings, greetings. Good to see you. Iris, good morning, day, evening, and all of those things. And there's my mother-in-law, Hazel. Good morning, sweetie. Good to see you. Your wife is your wife. My wife, your daughter, is not here tonight. She's over staying in my dad's place. But she sounded like she was having a good time the last time I talked to her. So and belated happy birthday, since I guess now we've ticked over from your birthday, but I know Deb had a chance to wish you happy birthday. So much love from our house. Ilva, hello, sweetie. Good to see you too. Sandra, checking in from Vienna. Lovely to have you. Nicole, good morning. Bon matin. Good to see you. Cloudy and chilly Germany. Yeah, well, that's what happens when you live in Northern Europe in the wintertime. That's one of the reasons I'm in California. because much as I love Germany and England and all those places in the winter, and including many parts of the United States, and in the wintertime, I am just way too Californian. I spent one part of one winter in the American Midwest many years ago, and it almost killed me. It almost did. And I composed a rule for myself at that point is that if you have to shovel snow out of your way just to get to your driveway so you can shovel the snow out of your driveway, that is not a place for a native Californian to live. So, and I'm sure that's true in many, many other parts of the world, and that I am ridiculously spoiled. But I'll live with that because I'm helpless. I'm helpless. It's just like, you take a goldfish and you throw it out onto dry land. It's not the goldfish's fault that it can't breathe air. Well, it's not my fault. I can't live in extremely snowy, cold winters. I'm not, despite my Viking forebears, I am not built for it. I have been ruined by California. Jeremy, hello. Trials and tribulations, blah, blah. I'm sorry to hear about trials and tribulations, although, brother, I feel you. But good to see you anyway. Who else? Chris, good morning to you. Good to see you, Chris. And thank you for all your work. Mark. Hi, Mark. This is Mark Gumball. Good to see you, buddy. Who else? Christina, good morning. Good morning. Snowy and cold Berlin. Yes. I know. I feel for you. Although be glad, at least if you're snowy and cold, at least you're living in a snowy and cold but extremely exciting, interesting city. So that's something. David Nelson, g'day. 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 Good to see you, mate. Tracy, hello. Good to see you too. Ronnie, good morning. Penny, hello. Nice to see you. Anamika, I don't think I've said hello to you yet. No, I don't think I have, but I would say it again anyway. I don't care. Becky, good to see you too. That's Becky Willems. I think we've got more than one Becky. Debbie, good morning, good morning. Let me see if I checked in with everybody else here. Oh, yeah, Lizzo. We saw Lizzo. You saw Hamilton. That's right. You mentioned that. Excellent. I'm glad you got to see it. I actually saw Hamilton on stage, although I didn't get to see Juan Manuel. He was not in the show by that point. It was his understudy who played Hamilton, but the understudy was great. I have to say, he was wonderful. Although I would have been perfectly happy to see Juan Manuel Miranda as well, obviously. But anyway, so what wonderful show. I really, really enjoyed it. Who else have we not said hello to? I think I already said hello. Sandra, Cole. Okay, it's going backward now. That's what's going on. I have no idea why it's doing this. Stream chat. What happens if I refresh the chat? Oh, God, it's just blanked everything. Oh, well, doesn't matter because I think I've said hello to everybody who I had on my list. And just in case I haven't... Oh, there's Olaf. I hadn't seen Olaf. Thank you, Olaf. It's nice to have contracts. For my publishers changed their business arrangements, and because of that, we went like 2 years plus without being able to negotiate any new books. And that was extremely frustrating. And occasionally downright worrisome for somebody who makes their living writing books and has always been pretty much had one American publisher since 1985, really, for all intents and purposes. So that was a slightly nervous-making 2 years of not being able to sign any new contracts and beginning to wonder, like, well, what am I going to do if I can't if I can't write books for a living? You know, is it too late to go back to my dream of being a professional jai-alai player? Probably. Now, I never had a dream of being a professional jai-alai player. To tell you the truth, I'm not even exactly sure how jai-alai is played. I know it's very popular in South America, and it has something to do with flinging a ball with some kind of a scoop racket thing. But that's the extent of my jai-alai knowledge. No, I was thinking I'd probably wind up back in retail going, hi, can I help you with that? Can I show you another in the same size but a different color? You know, that kind of stuff. That's really the only other thing I have any background in. So, not for many years, I hasten to say. Anyway, so I'm going to start reading because I've already frittered away much time. And we are starting part 3. Simon Snowlock. So the first part was Simon Mooncalf, and then the second part was Simon Pilgrim when he left the castle. And this is part 3, Simon Snowlock. So, let us read. Chapter 30, 1,000 Nails. Somebody was breaking down the door with axes, hacking, chopping, splintering away the shielding timber. "Doctor!" Simon shouted, sitting up. "It's the soldiers! The soldiers have come!" But he was not in Morganase's chambers. He was wrapped in sweat-drenched sheets on a small bed in a small, neat room. The sound of blades splitting wood continued. A moment later, the door swung inward and the din rose in volume. An unfamiliar face peered around the edge, pale and long of chin, topped with a sparse crest of hair that gleamed as coppery red as Simon's own in the framing sunlight. His one visible eye was blue. The other was covered by a black patch. "Ah," the stranger said. "You're awake, then. Good." He was an Erkenlander by his accent, with a touch of the northern heaviness. He closed the door behind him, cutting off some of the noise of the work outside. He wore a long gray priestly cassock that hung limply on his slight frame. "I'm Father Strangyard." He settled onto a high-backed chair beside Simon. Other than the bed and a low table covered with parchment and odds and ends, it was the only furniture in the room. When he was comfortable, the stranger leaned forward and patted Simon's hand. "How are you feeling? Better, I hope." Yes, I suppose so." Simon looked around. "Where am I?" "Naglemund. But you knew that, of course." Father Strangyard smiled. "More specifically, you are in my room. My bed, too." He lifted a hand. I hope you found it comfortable. It is not very well appointed, but... Oh, goodness, how foolish of me. You have been sleeping in the forest, haven't you?" The priest gave another quick, hesitant smile. "It must be better than the forest, Simon swung his feet to the cold floor, relieved to find that he was wearing breeches, a little unsettled to see that they weren't his own. "Where are my friends?" A dark thought came up like a cloud. "Binnabig! Is he dead?" Strangyard pursed his lips as though Simon had uttered a mild blasphemy. "Dead? Praise you, Cyrus, no, although he is not well at all." "May I see him?" Simon slid down to the flags to look for his boots. "Where is he? And how is Maria?" "Maria?" The priest's expression was puzzled as he watched Simon crawl about the floor. "Ah, your other companion is fine. You will eventually see her as well, I do not doubt." The boots were under the writing table. As Simon pulled them on, Father Strangyard reached around and lifted a clean white blouse from the back of the chair. "Here," he said. "My, you are in a hurry. Would you like to see your friend first, or have something to eat?" Simon was already tying the front of the shirt closed. "Binnabig and Maria, then eat food," he grunted, concentrating. "And Kintaka, too." "Hard as times have been of late," the father said in a tone of reproof, "we never eat wolves at Naglemund. I assume you're counting her as a friend." Looking up, Simon saw that the one-eyed man was making a joke. "Yes," Simon said, feeling suddenly shy. "A friend." "Then let us go," the priest said, standing. "I was told to make sure you were well provided for, so the sooner I get food into you, the better I will have fulfilled my commission." He opened the door, admitting another flood of sunshine and noise. Simon blinked in the strong light. looking up at the high walls of the keep and the vast purple and brown expanse of the Weldhelm, looming above, dwarfing the gray-clad sentries. A congregation of angular stone buildings bulked large at the keep's center, arranged without any of the Hayholt's eccentric beauty, its contrast of styles and eras. The dark, smoke-streaked cubes of sandstone, the small lightless windows and heavy doors, looked as if they had been constructed for one purpose only, to keep something out. Just a stone's throw away, in the midst of the swarming commons yard, a crew of shirtless men were splitting a stack of logs, adding to a pile of timbers already as high as their heads. "So that's what that chopping was," Simon said, watching the axes flash and fall. "What are they doing?" Father Strangyard turned to follow his glance. Ah, building a pyre. They are going to burn the Huna, the giant." "The giant?" It came back in a rush, the snarling, leathery face, the arms of impossible length lashing out at him. "It isn't dead?" Oh, quite dead, yes." Strangyard began walking toward the main buildings. Simon fell in behind, sneaking a last look back at the growing stack of spars. "You see, Simon, some of Joshua's men wanted to make a show of it. You understand? Cut its head off, mount it on the gate, that sort of thing. The prince said no. He said that it was an evil thing, but it was no animal. They wear clothes of a sort sometimes. Did you know? Carry clubs as well. Cudgels, really. Well, Joshua said he'd mount no enemy's head for sport. Said burn it." Strangyard tugged at his ear. "So they're going to burn it." "Tonight?" Simon had to stretch to keep up with the priest's long strides. "Just as soon as the pyre is finished. Prince Joshua doesn't want any more made of it than has to be. I'm sure he'd just as lief bury it in the hills, but the people want to see it dead." Father Strangyard quickly sketched the sign of the tree on his breast. "It's the third one. Come down from the north this month, you see. One of the others killed the bishop's brother. It's all been most unnatural." Bennebic was in a small room off the chapel, which stood in the center courtyard of the main keep buildings. He looked very pale and smaller than Simon expected, as though some of the substance had drained from him, but his smile was cheerful. "Friend Simon," he said, sitting up carefully. His small brown torso was swathed in bandages to the collarbone. Simon resisted the urge to pick the little man up and hug him, not wanting to open the healing wounds. Instead, he sat on the edge of the pallet and clasped one of Bennebic's warm hands. I thought you were lost," Simon said, tongue thick in his mouth. "As did I, when the arrow struck at me," the troll said with a rueful shake of the head. "But apparently nothing of a serious nature was pierced. I have been given good care, and but for a soreness of movement, I am nearly new." He turned to the priest. "I walked upon the yard today." "Good, very good." Father Strangyard smiled absently, fiddling with the string that held his eye patch in place. "Well, I must be going. I'm sure there are many things you companions wish to discuss." He sidled for the door. "Simon, please use my room as long as you like. I am sharing Brother Eglaf's room for the nonce. He makes terrible noises when he sleeps, but he is a good man to take me in." Simon thanked him. After a last wish for Bennebic's continued return to strength, he went out. "He is a man of very good mind, Simon," Bennebic said as they listened to the priest's footsteps fade down the corridor. "Master of the castle archives, he is. We have already had fine conversing." "He's a little strange, isn't he? Sort of distracted?" Bennebic laughed and winced and coughed. Simon leaned forward, apprehensive, but the troll waved him back. "A moment only," he said. When he had his breath back, he continued. "Some types of men, Simon, whose minds are very full of thoughts. They are forgetting to speak and act like normal men." Simon nodded, looking around at the room. It was much like Strangyard's, spare, small, with whitewashed walls. Instead of the piles of books and parchment, the writing table bore only a copy of the Book of the Aedon, a red ribbon like a slender tongue keeping the place where the last reader had stopped. "Do you know where Mari is?" he asked. "No." Benedict looked extremely serious. Simon wondered why. "I expect she gave her message to Josua. Perhaps he sent her back to wherever the princess is, for relaying of a return answer." "No!" Simon did not like that idea at all. How could all of that have happened so fast?" "So fast?" Benedict smiled. "This is the morning of the second day we have been in Naglemund." Simon was astonished. "How can that be? I just woke up." Benedict shook his head, sliding back down into the sheets as he did so. "Not so. You slept through most of yesterday, waking only to take some water, then sleeping again. I would suppose it was the last part of the trip, weakening you on top of your fever from when we rode the river." "Eucires!" He felt as though his body had betrayed him. "And Maria's been sent away?" Benedict raised a placating hand from beneath the sheets. I have no such knowledge. That was guess only. Just as likely she is here somewhere, perhaps staying with some of the women folk or in the quarter of servants. She is, for all said, a servant." Simon glowered. Benedict gently took back the hand the boy had tugged free in his agitation. "Be of patience, Simon, friend," the troll said. "You have done a hero's work to be reaching so far. Who knows what may happen next?" You are right, I suppose." He took a deep breath. "And you have saved my life," Benedict pointed out. "Is that important?" Simon distractedly patted the small hand and stood up. "You have saved mine as well, several times. Friends are friends." Benedict smiled, but his eyes showed weariness. "Friends are friends," he agreed. "Speaking of those things, I must sleep again now. There will be important doings in the days ahead. Will you look on Kantaka and how she is being kept? Strangyard was supposed to be fetching her to me, but I am afraid it has slipped from his busy head, like down from a—" he plumped a pillow. "Certainly," Simon said, pulling open the door. "Do you know where she is?" "Strangyard said the stables," Benedict responded, yawning. Simon let himself out. As he emerged into the central courtyard, stopping to watch the people passing by, courtiers and servants and clerics, none of them paying him the slightest attention, he was struck by a twofold revelation. First of all, he had no idea where the stables might be. Second, he was very, very hungry. Father Strangyard had said something about being sworn to see him provided for, but the priest had wandered off. He was a daft old bird. Suddenly he saw a familiar face across the courtyard. He had already taken several steps before he remembered the name that went with it. "Sangfugel!" he called, and the harper stopped, looking around to find who had called him. He saw Simon running toward him and shaded his eyes, continuing to look puzzled even as the youth slid to a stop before him. "Yes?" he said. He was dressed in a rich doublet of lavender, and his dark hair hung gracefully from beneath a matching feathered cap. Even in his clean clothes, Simon felt shabby standing before the politely smiling musician. "Do you have some message for me?" "I'm Simon. You probably don't remember. You spoke to me at the funeral feast, at the hayhold." Sangfugel stared at him a moment longer, frowning slightly. Then his face lightened. "Simon! Aha, of course! The well-spoken bottle boy! I am truly sorry. I didn't recognize you at all. You have grown a great deal." "I have?" The harper grinned. "I should say! You certainly didn't have this fuzz on your face when I saw you last." He reached out and cupped Simon's chin. "Or at least I don't remember any." "Fuzz?" Wonderingly, Simon reached his hand up and felt his cheek. It did seem furry, but soft like the hair on the back of his arms. Sangfugel quirked his lips and laughed. "How could you not know? When I first got my mannish beard, I was at my mother's glass every day to see how it was coming in." He raised a hand to his clean-shaven jaw. "Now I am cutting it off with curses every morning to keep my face soft for the ladies." Simon felt himself blushing. He must seem such a rustic. "I have been away from looking-glasses for a while." Sangfugel looked him up and down. "Taller, too, if my memory serves. What brings you to Naglemund? Not that I can't guess. There are many here who have fled the hayhold, my master Prince Josua not least of them." "I know," Simon said. He felt the need to say something that would bring him back to some kind of parity with the well-dressed young man. "I helped him escape." The harper raised an eyebrow. "True? Well, this sounds an interesting tale indeed. Have you eaten yet? Or would you like to find some wine? I know the hour is early, but truth to tell, I have not yet been to bed. To sleep." "Food would be splendid," Simon said. "But first I must do something. Can you show me where the stables are?" Sangfugel smiled. "What now, young hero? Will you ride down to Urchester to bring Priorati's head to us in a sack?" Simon blushed again, but this time with no little pleasure. "Come," the harper said. "Stables, then food." The bent, sour-faced man pitchforking hay seemed suspicious when Simon asked after Kantaka's whereabouts. "Here, what you want with him?" the man asked, then shook his head. "Fair vicious he is. Not right to put him in here. I shouldn't have to, but that's what the prince said. Almost took my hand off, the beast did." "Well, then," Simon said, "you should be glad to be rid of her. Take me to her." "That's a devil beast, I tell you," the man said. They followed his limping progress all the way through the dark stables and out the back door to a muddy yard nestled in the shadow of the wall. "Bring the cows here for slaughter sometimes," the man said, pointing to a square pit. "Don't know why the prince brought this one back alive, for poor old Lucaman to mind. Should have put a spear right in the evil bastard, like that giant." Simon gave the bent man a look of disgust, then strode forward to the edge of the pit. A rope, staked to the ground at the edge, trailed down into the hole. It was knotted around the neck of the wolf, who lay on her side at the pit's muddy bottom. Simon was shocked. "What have you done to her?" he shouted, turning on the stable-keeper. Sangfugel, treading the soggy yard more carefully, came up behind. The old man's suspicion turned to peevishness. "Didn't do nothing," he said resentfully. "Proper devil he is. Howled and howled like a fiend. Tried to bite me, too." "So would I," Simon snapped.
As a matter of fact, I still might. Bring her out of there." "How then?" the man asked, disquieted. "Just pull on the rope. He's too big by half." "She, you idiot!" Simon was full of rage to see the wolf, his companion of uncounted miles, lying in a dark, runny hole. He leaned over. "Kantaka!" he called. "Ho! Kantaka!" She flicked her ears as though to dislodge a fly, but did not open her eyes. Simon looked around the yard until he saw what he needed: the chopping block, a scarred log stump as big as a man's chest. He wrestled it to the pit, while the stableman and the harper looked on in puzzlement. "Watch now," he called down to the wolf, then rolled the stump over the edge. It thumped into the soft earth, only a cubit from the wolf's hind legs. She lifted her head briefly to look, then lay back. Simon again peered over the edge of the pit, trying to coax Kantaka up, but she paid him no heed. "Be careful, for pity's sake," Sangfugel said. "He's lucky that beast's resting now," the other man said, sagely chewing on his thumbnail. "Should have heard him afore, howling and all." Simon swung his feet over the rim of the hole and slid down, landing in the squelching, slippery mud below. "What are you doing?" Sangfugel cried. "Are you mad?" Simon crouched beside the wolf and slowly reached his hand forward. She growled at him, but he held his fingers out. Her muddy nose snuffled briefly. Then she carefully extended her long tongue and licked the back of his hand. Simon applied himself to scratching her ears, then felt her for cuts or broken bones. None were apparent. He turned and sat the chopping log upright, digging it into the mud beside the pit wall, then went back to Kantaka. He put his arms around the width of her trunk and coerced her into standing upright. "He's mad, isn't he?" the sour-faced man half whispered to Sangfugel. "Close your mouth," Simon growled, looking at his clean boots and clothing already smeared with mud. "Grab the rope and pull when I say pull. Sangfugel, cut his head off if he dallies." "Here now," the man said reproachfully, but clutched the rope. The harper took up a position behind him to help. Simon urged Kantaka toward the stump, at last persuading her to put her forelegs up on it. Simon lowered his shoulder to her wide, fur-fringed hindquarters. "Ready? Haul away!" he cried. The rope went taut. Kantaka fought it at first, pulling away from the straining men, dropping her considerable weight back on Simon, whose feet were slipping in the ooze. Just as he thought he could feel himself sliding under, to be crushed to death in a mud pit beneath a large wolf, Kantaka relented and went with the tug of the rope. Simon did slide then, but had the satisfaction of seeing the wolf scramble, kicking over the side of the pit. There was a whoop of surprise and consternation from the stable-keeper and Sangfugel as her yellow-eyed head breached the rim. Simon used the block himself to climb out. The stableman was cowering in terror before the wolf, who regarded him balefully. Sangfugel, looking more than a little alarmed himself, was cautiously sliding away from her on his rump, for the moment uncaring of the damage to his fine garments. Simon laughed and helped the harper to his feet. "Come with me," he said. "We will deliver Kantaka to her friend and master, who you should meet anyway, and then perhaps that food we talked of?" Sangfugel slowly nodded his head. "Now that I have seen Simon, companion of wolves, some of the other things are easier to credit. Let us go, by all means." Kantaka nudged the prostrate stable-keeper one last time, eliciting a whimper of fright. Simon untied her rope from the stake, and they set out across the stable, leaving 4 pairs of muddy footprints behind them. While Binabik and Kantaka had their reunion, moderated by Simon in order to protect the still weak troll from his mount's dangerous exuberance, Sangfugel slipped off to the kitchens. He returned a short while later with a jar of beer, a goodly quantity of cold mutton, cheese, and bread wrapped in a cloth. He was also, Simon was surprised to see, still wearing the same mud-spattered clothes. "The south battlement where we're going is quite dusty," the harper explained. "I'm damned if I'm going to ruin another doublet." As they headed for the keep's main gate and the steep staircase up to the battlements, Simon commented on the great number of people who milled about the commons yard and the tents and lean-tos that dotted the open spaces. "Come for the refuge, many of them," Sangfugel said. "Most are off the Frost March and out of the Greenwade River Valley. Some also from Udniate, who found Earl Guthwolf's hand a little too heavy. But mostly they're folk who've been driven from their land by weather, or bandits, or other things, like the Hoonin." He gestured to the completed pyre as they passed. The woodsmen had gone away. The stack of lumber stood mute and significant as a ruined church. Atop the battlements they settled on rough-hewn stone. The sun had scaled high into the sky, beating down past the few remaining clouds. Simon wished he had a hat. "Either you or someone else has brought good weather with them." Sangfugel opened his doublet to the warmth. "It has been the strangest Maya weather of my memory. Snow flurries on the Frost March, cold rains down into Udniate. Hail! We had hail a fortnight ago. Ice stones big as birds' eggs." He began to unwrap the food as Simon took in the view. Perched as they were atop the high walls of the inner keep, Naglemund was spread at their feet like a blanket. The castle hunched in a deep-sided hollow in the Weldhelm Hills, like something held in an upturned palm. Below the western battlements, across from where they sat, lay the castle's broad outer wall. Beyond that, the crooked streets of Naglemund town sloped down to the outwall of the city. Outside the wall lay a nearly limitless expanse of rocky grazing land and low hills. On the far side, between the eastern battlements and the stark violet wall of the Weldhelm, was a long twisting trail down from the crest of the hills. Dotting the slopes on either side of the pathway were 1,000 points of blackly gleaming sunlight. "What are those?" Simon pointed. Sangfugel squinted his eyes, chewing. The nails, you mean?" "What nails? Those long spikes on the hillside are what I'm asking about." The harper nodded. "The nails. What do you think Naglemund means, anyway? You hay-hold folk have forgotten your Erkenlandish. Nail fort, that's what it means. Duke Eswides put them there when he built Naglemund." "When was that? What are they for?" Staring, Simon let the wind take his breadcrumbs and swirl them out over the outer bailey. "Sometime before the Rimmersman came south. That's all I know," Sangfugel answered. "But he got the steel from Rimmersgard, all those bars. The Dvernings made them," he added significantly, but the name meant nothing to Simon. "Why, though? It's like an iron garden." "To keep the Scythi out," Sangfugel declared. "Eswides was terrified of them because this was really their land. One of their great cities, I forget the name, was on the far side of the hills here." "Dai Chiquiza," Simon said quietly, staring at the thicket of tarnished metal. "That's right," the harper agreed. "And the Scythi can't stand iron, it's said. Makes them quite ill, even kills them. So Eswides surrounded his castle with those steel nails. Used to be they were all around the front of the keep as well, but with the Scythi gone, they just got in the way. Made it hard to bring in wagons on the market day, things of that sort. So when King John gave this place to Josua, to keep him and his brother apart as much as possible, I suspect, my master took them all down except the ones there on the slopes. I think they amuse him. He likes old things very much, the prince, my master." As they shared the jug of beer, Simon related to the harp player a pared-down version of what had happened to him since they had last met, leaving out some of the more inexplicable things since he had no answer to the questions the harper would surely raise.
Sangfugal was impressed, but he was most strongly affected by the tale of Josua's rescue and Morgenes' martyrdom. "Ah, that villain Elias," he said at last, and Simon was surprised by the look of real anger that clouded the harper's face like a storm. King John should have strangled that monster at birth, or barring that, at least made him general of the armies and let him harry the Thrithings men. Anything but putting him on the Dragonbone chair to be a plague to us all. "But he is there," Simon said, chewing. "Do you think he will attack us here in Naglemund?" "Only God and the devil know," Sangfugal grinned sourly, "and the devil's hedging his bets. He may not know yet that Josua is here, although that certainly won't last long. This keep is a strong, strong place. We have long dead Iswides to thank for that, anyway. All the same, strong or no, I can't imagine Elias standing by for long while Josua builds power here in the north." "But I thought Prince Josua didn't want to be king," Simon said. "And he doesn't. But Elias is not the type to understand that. Ambitious men never believe others aren't the same. He's also got Pryrates whispering words of snaky advice in his ear." "But haven't Josua and the king been enemies for years? Since long before Pryrates came?" Sangfugal nodded. "There has been no shortage of trouble between them. They loved each other once, were closer than most brothers, or so I'm told by Josua's older retainers, but they fell out, and then Hylissa died." "Hylissa?" Simon asked. "Elias's Nabanai wife. Josua was bringing her to Elias, who is still a prince, at war then for his father and the Thrithings. Their party was waylaid by Thrithings raiders. Josua lost his hand trying to defend Hylissa, but to no avail. The raiders were too many." Simon let out a long breath. "So that's how it happened." "It was the death of any love between them, or so people say." After thinking for a while on Sangfugal's words, Simon stood and stretched. The sore spot on his ribs gave him a warning twinge. "So what will Prince Josua do now?" he asked. The harper scratched at his arm and stared down at the commons yard. "I can't even guess," Sangfugal said. "Prince Josua is cautious and slow to action. Anyway, they don't usually call me in to discuss strategy." He smiled. "There is talk that important emissaries are arriving, and that sometime, within a sennight, Josua will call a formal ride." "A what?" "Ride. It's an old Erkinlandish term for council, more or less. People in these parts tend to cling to the older ways. Out in the country, away from the castle, most of them still use the old speech. A hay-holt man like yourself would probably need a local interpreter." Simon would not be distracted by talk of rustic fables. "A council, you said? A ride? Would that be a council of war?" "These days," the musician replied, and his face was again somber, "any council at Naglemund will be a council of war." They walked along the battlements. "I'm surprised," Sangfugal said, "that with all the services you have rendered to my master, he has not yet called you for an audience." "I've only just got out of bed this morning," Simon said. "Besides, he may not even have known it was me, in a dark clearing with a dying giant and all." "I suppose you're right," the harper said, clinging to his hat, which was doing its best to take to the gusting winds. Still, Simon thought, if Maria took him a message from the princess, I should hope she would mention her companions. I never would have thought she was the kind of girl to just forget us. He had to be fair, though. What girl suddenly saved from the damp and dangerous wilderness would not prefer to spend her time with the gentlefolk of the castle instead of a stringy scullion? "You haven't by any chance seen the girl Marya, who came with us?" he asked. Sangfugel shook his head. "People are coming in at the gates every day, and not just the ones fleeing the outlying farms and villages either. The outriders for Prince Gwithin of Hernesteer came in last night, horses in a lather. The prince's party should be here this evening. Lord Ethelfirth of Tinset has been here for a week with 200 men. Baron Ordmare brought 100 Uttersall men just after. Other lords are coming in with their musters from all around. The hunt is afoot, Simon, though the Adon only knows who's hunting who." They had reached the northeastern turret. Sangfugel tipped a salute to the young soldier who was walking sentry. Beyond his grey-cloaked shoulder rose the bulk of the Weldhelm, the massive hills seeming close enough to reach out and touch. "Busy as he is," the harper said suddenly, "it doesn't seem right that he shouldn't have seen you yet. Do you mind if I put in a word for you? I'm to attend him at dinner tonight." "I would certainly like to see him, yes. I was very frightened for his safety, and my master gave a great deal so that Josua could return here to his home." Simon was surprised to notice a faint touch of bitterness in his own voice. He hadn't meant it to sound that way, but still he had gone through a lot to get here, and it had been him and no other who had found Josua, trussed and hanging like a pheasant over a cotsman's doorway. The tone of the remark had not escaped Sangfugel either. The look he turned on Simon was compounded of sympathy and amusement. "I understand. I would advise, however, that you do not put it to my prince in quite that manner. He is a proud, difficult man, Simon, but I am sure he has not forgotten you. Things have been, as you know, rather difficult of late in these parts, almost as harrowing as your own journey." Simon lifted his chin and stared out at the hills, at the strange shimmer of the wind-ruffled trees. "I know," he said. "If he can see me, it will be an honor. If he cannot, well, that is what will be." The harper grinned lazily, playful eyes drooping at the corners. "A proud and fair speech. Come now, let me show you the nails of Naglemund." It was truly an astonishing sight in broad daylight. The field of shining poles, starting within a few ells of the ditch below the eastern wall of the castle, slanted up the slope and away for perhaps a quarter of a league right up to the feet of the hills. They were arranged in symmetrical rows, as though a legion of spearmen had been buried there, leaving only their weapons protruding above the dark soil to show how conscientiously they stood their guard. The road that meandered down from a gaping cavern in the hill's western face wound back and forth between the rows as sinuously as the track of a serpent, stopping at last before the Naglemund's heavy eastern gate. "And whatever was his name did all this because he was frightened of the Scythe?" Simon asked, bewildered by the strange silvery dark crop that stretched before him. "Why not just put them at the top of the wall?" "Duke Eswides was his name. He was Naban's governor here, and he was breaking precedent to place his castle on Scythe lands. As to why not on the walls, well, I suppose he feared they could find some way to get over a single wall, or beneath, perhaps. This way they would need to go through them. You have not seen the half, Simon. These things used to sprout on every side." Sangfugel swung his arm in an encompassing gesture. "What did the Scythe do?" Simon asked. "Did they try an attack?" Sangfugel frowned. "Not as I've ever heard. You really should ask old Father Strangyard about it. He's the archivist and historian of the place." Simon smiled. "I've met him. Interesting old scuffer, isn't he? He told me once that when Eswides built this place, the Scythe called it... Damn,
I should know these old stories, being a balladeer. Anyway, the name they had for it meant something like trap that catches the hunter, as if Aeswides had just walled himself in or some such, that he had made his own trap. And did he? What happened to him? Sangfugel shook his head and nearly lost his hat again. Damn me if I know. Probably got old and died here. I don't think the Scythe paid much attention to him. Okay, I have about another page and a half to read, so I'm going to go past. It's already a little bit past, but I got about another 5 minutes or 4 minutes or so. It took them an hour to complete the circuit. They had long ago emptied the jar of beer Sangfugel had brought to wash down their meal, but the harper had prudently brought a skin of wine as well, thus saving them from a dry hike. They were laughing. The older man was teaching Simon a bawdy song about a Nabanai noblewoman when they reached the main gate and the winding stairs back down to the ground. As they emerged from the gatehouse, they found themselves in a milling crowd of workmen and soldiers. Most of the latter were off duty, to judge by the disarray of their dress. Everyone was shouting and shoving. Simon quickly found himself crushed between a fat man and a bearded guardsman. "What's happening?" he called to Sangfugel, who had been pulled a short distance away by the movement of the crowd. "I'm not sure," the other called back. "Perhaps Gwithin of Hernus Adharc has arrived." The fat man turned his red face up to Simon. "No, it ain't," he said cheerfully. His breath stank of beer and onions. "It's that giant, the one what the prince has killed." He pointed toward the pyre, which still stood naked at the edge of the commons. "But I don't see the giant," Simon said. "They're just a-fetching him," the man said. "I just came with the others to make sure of seeing. My sister's son was one of the beaters who had helped catch the devil beast," he added proudly. Now another wave of sound passed through the crowd. Somebody up front could see something, and the word was hurrying back to those who could not. Necks were craned, and children were lifted to the shoulders of patient, dirty-faced mothers. Simon looked around. Sangfugel had disappeared. He stood up on tiptoe and found that only a few in the throng were as tall as he. Beyond the pyre he saw the bright silks of a tent or awning, and before it the flashing colors of some of the castle's courtiers, sitting on stools and talking, waving their sleeves as they gestured, like a branch full of brilliant birds. He scanned the faces for a glimpse of Maria. Perhaps she had already found a noble lady to attach herself to. Surely it was not safe for her to go back to the princess at the Hayholt, or wherever she was. None of the faces was hers, however, and before he could look for her elsewhere in the assemblage, a line of armored men appeared in one of the archways of the inner wall. Now the crowd was murmuring in earnest, for the first half-dozen soldiers were followed by a team of horses pulling a high wooden cart. Simon felt a moment of hollowness in his stomach, but dismissed it. Was he to go all queasy every time a wagon creaked by? As the wheels ground to a halt and the soldiers gathered around to unload the pale thing humped high on the bed of the cart, Simon caught a glimpse of crow-black hair and white skin over where the nobles stood, beyond the stacked timbers. When he looked closer, hoping it was Maria, the laughing courtiers had closed in again, and there was nothing to see. It took 8 straining guardsmen to lift the pole on which the giant's body hung, like a deer from the king's hunting preserve, and even so they still had to slide it from the wagon to the ground before they could get their shoulders comfortably under the bar. The creature had been trussed at knees and elbows. Huge hands wagged in the air as its back bumped along the ground. The crowd, which had pushed forward eagerly, now began to fall back, with exclamations of fear and disgust. The thing looked more man-like now, Simon thought, than when it had loomed upright before him in the forest of the stile. With the skin of its dark face gone slack in death, the menacing snarl erased, it wore the puzzled expression of a man given unfathomable news. As Strangyard had said, it wore a garment of rough cloth around its waist, a belt of some reddish stones hung dragging in the dust of the commons. The fat man beside Simon, who had been exhorting the soldiers to march faster, turned a merry eye his way. "Do you know what he was a-wearing round his neck?" he shouted. Simon, hemmed in on both sides, shrugged. "Skulls," the man said, as pleased as if he had given them to the dead giant himself. "Wearing 'em as a necklace, he was. Giving 'em an 8-night burial, the princes, even though it's anyone's guess whose they be." He turned back to the spectacle again. Several other soldiers had climbed to the top of the pyre and were helping the bearers move the massive creature into place. When they had wrestled it onto the spot, lying on its back at the summit, they slipped the pole out from between its crossed arms and legs and scrambled down in a group. As the last man leaped down to the ground, the great body slipped forward a little way, and the sudden movement made a woman scream. Several children began to cry. A gray-cloaked officer shouted an order. One of the soldiers leaned forward and thrust a torch deep into the bundles of straw that had been laid around the edges. The flames, strangely colorless in the late afternoon sun, began to bend around the straw, reaching upward toward more substantial food. Wisps of smoke twined around the form of the giant, and some current of air bent his shaggy fur like dry summer grass. There! He had seen her again, beyond the pyre. Trying to push forward, he received a sharp elbow to the ribs from someone fighting to retain their choice viewpoint. He stopped, frustrated, and stared at the spot where he thought he had spotted her. Then he saw and realized it was not Maria. This black-haired woman, wrapped in a somber, exquisitely sewn green cloak, was perhaps 20 years older. She was certainly beautiful, though, with ivory skin and wide, up-tilted eyes. As Simon stared, she, in turn, watched the burning giant, whose hair was beginning to curl and blacken as the fire climbed the mound of pine logs. The smoke rose like a curtain, obscuring her from Simon's view. He wondered who she was, and why, as the Naglemunders all around shouted and waved their fists at the pillar of smoke, why she looked into the blaze with such sad, angry eyes.
And that's the end of the chapter, and that's where we're going to stop. Oh, and I've gone out of focus again. Come back, focus. Come back. Oh, well, it doesn't matter because I'm done. Okay, so thank you. Hello, Suzanne. And Xavier. Hello. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. Xavier. Top of the morning to you. And Kristen. Hello. And Susan. Good to see you too. Anyway, I am now wrapping it up for the night. I will be back at 7 p.m. to read the next chapter, chapter 31. And I will be back next week in the same time slot to read at you once more, as far as I know. It will be Thanksgiving weekend here in California in the United States. But I don't think that's going to have any effect on me reading. So expect to see me the same tad time, same tad channel. And with that, I will thank you. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your loved ones. Take good care of the folks around you. And in that way, you will be taking good care of yourself. So lots of love. Be good. Peace. And I'll see you real soon. Thanks for joining me. Bye.